Well, the conversation is happening here right now in New Zealand. We've heard from Dave Maslin from New Zealand Merino around the accreditation that they are doing in regenerative agricultural practices that may already be existing here in New Zealand because brands around the world are asking for it. And in a bit of research, I found out that this has been going on for some time. If you haven't watched Alan Savory's TED Talk on YouTube, please do Google it and have a listen if you're unfamiliar with him. You will also see him in the Netflix series Kiss the Ground. And so regenerative, whether we here in New Zealand understand or agree with whether we're doing it here or not, park that to the side, it is extremely popular with our consumers. And so therefore, in verifying the practices and ticking that box for the consumer, the Savory Institute has gone down a program that is known as Land to Market. It's a new standard for verifying land health to the consumer that has been developed in collaboration with leading scientists and researchers around the world. Now, the Savory Institute is using a soil and landscape assessment methodology that tracks outcomes in soil health, biodiversity, and ecosystem function. Our next guest is going to give us a valuable perspective on how regenerative agriculture is growing in demand, but how more so they are capturing that value for their farmers and ranchers in the US, and what we can learn here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So I welcome the US-based Land to Market Program Manager, Chris Kerston. Welcome, Chris. Thank you for taking the time to join us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Now, Chris, could you give us a bit of a background, because you are a full-time rancher and you have co-managed a 2,000-acre diverse farm in the Sacramento Valley and sadly just lost your home to the wildfires. What's life like for you farming in the US?
Yeah, it's changed a lot over the last couple decades. I think that we've put a lot of energy and a lot of my career has been focused on creating supply chains that are able to differentiate what's happening on the farm and connecting the farmer to the consumer on shared values. So it's a wild time in light of the challenges that we're facing around weather and climate change, and all of those continue to be issues for everyone around the world. But at the same time, there's opportunities that are opening up with brand partners, retail partners, and ultimately driven by the consumer that's interested in knowing more about where their food comes from and connecting on the things that are important to them.
What was the changing point for you in your farming career to go down the path you're on?
Yeah, there was a few. It's hard to break it down to just one. But I think a lot of it was lack of resilience of, these commodity oligarchies. You don't have a lot of control in them. And so to be able to be part of a differentiated program, we went more direct to consumer really early on in that game, and being able to but it taught me a lot about how the industry, particularly around red meat, is changing and where there are opportunities there.
And this has attracted a lot of attention from some public figures, and it's really put you on a pedestal as a leader in both, of course, the regenerative scene, but also around tourism and connection through experience with the consumers as well. What's the roller coaster been like for you personally?
Yeah, the marketplace for regenerative is just exploding. We started this out thinking this was predominantly going to be a red meat play, and it's been surprising how much has involved pet food and particularly apparel. The amount of work that we're doing around wool and skins and hides is huge. So it's exciting to see different industries kind of coming to the same conclusion at the same time, that there's kind of two drivers for why industry is changing. One is that consumer values piece that we already kind of touched on. The others is this scope 3 accounting, this notion of brands should be held accountable for more of the impact that happens along their value chain or along their supply chain. And so society is starting to hold them more accountable for those impacts, which means they want more transparency and traceability back to farm. And they're actually seeing the farmer as an an opportunity to leverage change, to create positive change where their non-biological systems can't have a net positive results. The biological ones can.
It's an interesting one because here in New Zealand, right down the bottom of the world, where some people in your country don't know where we are extremely disconnected to the brands you're speaking of, which is like Timberland. And here for us, Icebreaker on Allbirds shoes, which are large in the US. We are disconnected with this trend. But the thing is, Chris, if New Zealand doesn't help contribute to that, another country will simply fill that, won't they?
Yeah, that's just it. And I love New Zealand. I think I've been something like 5-6 times in the last 3 years. Spent a lot of time driving around and have flown out of feels like every regional airport and certainly both internationals a number of times. And I think the opportunity for Kiwis to differentiate in this space is really unparamounted. There's only a few places in the world that really present the opportunity that New Zealand has. I do think there needs to be an acknowledgement of some change in management practices need to occur. I think that there needs to be an acknowledgement of things like overfert and water quality for certain producers. But by and large, as a country, as an opportunity, there's just so much there. And particularly for such a large red meat exporter, livestock has a target on its back in the world. That, even though that these are still important ingredients and mediums for lots of brands, the general zeitgeist is moving away from livestock products. That plant-based everything is becoming the trend. We wanted to shift that narrative, and so what we built in this ecological outcome verification scientific protocol was a way to be practice agnostic. There are practices and management tools to get you to regenerative, but we're not measuring that. We want to go measure the actual outcomes on the land. So we're looking at soil organic matter, and we're looking at water infiltration, and we're looking at sequestered carbon, and we're looking at biodiversity, because we want to be able to build that data set to go to the world and say, listen, livestock belong on this planet for a reason. These species are here. They naturally existed in grassland ecosystems. And if you want to maintain a grassland, there's a synergy between a grassland and a grazer that can and is having net positive results at scale all around the world. But to do that, we need empirical data to show that, to be able to quantify what's happening on the ground and look at an aggregate of ecosystem services, not a single variable like just carbon alone, but carbon plus other aspects. And that actually creates a lot of opportunities for market differentiation and options for new asset classes that are developing of things like ecosystem service credits for carbon, water, and biodiversity credits that didn't exist just a handful of years ago, that now could make a significant amount, a portion of the revenue coming into a farm operation based on the positive things that they're providing to society.
Huge amount of ideas coming out of that. Ecosystem credits, it's absolutely fantastic. And it's interesting too, because we yesterday spoke on the Opinion Maker show around New Zealand's energy story and how we're nearly 100% renewable, and utilising energy in a synthetic nutritional, producing synthetic meat is a huge use of energy, and how we can actually, do as nature intended it. That's all we're doing, Chris, absolutely. The likes of the trends, I mentioned Kiss the Ground with Woody Harrelson narrating it on Netflix. For me, that was a game changer for people understanding that the world doesn't have to move to plant-based proteins. How transformational is that type of communication style, and particularly in the US market?
Yeah, I think it's just getting bigger all the time. You kind of started with that paleo primal, there's another group called Weston Price that doesn't get as much notoriety, but it was groups that were really focusing on ancestral foods. And they broke through some of those health barriers first, showing that a diet high in red meat can be healthy for you. And then it just paved the way for that narrative to consumers to say, well, wouldn't it just make sense that if it's healthy for the eater, that it would also be healthy to raise when done correctly? And so I think we're seeing more of that from celebrities. The big thing that we see from brands is so much of their IP or their point of difference is built around these ingredients or these materials. When you're talking about a hide, I don't care who you are, a plant-based leather, a mushroom leather, a pineapple leather, whatever it is they're cooking up in labs these days, none of those things have that same warmth, that same durability, that same structure of a leather hide. These companies don't want to lose those things, but they're trying to respond to their customers. And so when we can facilitate connection and show, no, there actually is these positive things happening at the farm level, we can track that through a supply chain and help the brand access that supply, tell that story, differentiate it correctly, have impact accounting metrics with it. It really becomes a turnkey solution for them.
I'd love to understand how the land to market program works for implementation with your farmers and ranchers. What's the sort of process to accreditation that the farm or ranch would go down?
Yeah, so super different from like a welfare program or certified organic. Again, we're just going out and measuring practices. So we're trying to take as much burden off the farmer as possible and offer them as many new opportunities as possible. So typically we're looking for like map files in advance, or what they call KML files. We're going to look at that mapping and we're going to create a system plan for how we're going to go and measure that landscape. So where we're going to put long-term transects and where we're going to do monitoring for what we call leading indicators that show year-over-year trends that we're heading towards some big goals. That's really it. All of that is done in advance. We measure farms the same way all around the world. We normalize it to a given ecoregion that kind of calibrates our expectations and sets what we know is possible in that region, normalizes for weather. And then we have trained monitors come out and actually go out and do those measurements. So it's a mixture of some qualitative scoring and some empirical analysis that goes out for laboratory results. We have a cadre of monitors already in New Zealand we have a relationship with a group there called Ataland or Ataland Regeneration. Google them and find them. Their headquarters is in Taupo, but they work across both islands. We have a long relationship with a very big station in Lees Valley outside of Christchurch, and we have a number of lamb producers coming on board through Atkins Ranch, so out of the Napier area and throughout that whole north central east coast on the North Island there. So there's resources in place. If someone's interested in this, they can reach out to us through Savory Institute or through Ataland, and we can set up and kind of walk somebody through what it looks like to come out and have somebody monitor their land. But there's very little upfront work for them. It's just going out and actually measuring those ecosystem services.
Thank you so much for giving some tangible examples here in New Zealand. And Atkins Ranch are doing some incredible work and leading the way there in the meat side of it, as we spoke to New Zealand Merino around what they're doing with regenerative accreditation. Hugh Jelly from Outer Land is doing some great work, as you mentioned, there as well. But the big thing is that with any sort of change, our farmers and growers see a lot of capital outlay with no premium realistically at the end of it. What are you seeing from these brands prepared to pay more? And when we say more, by how much more to make change?
Yeah. So there's always that kind of, we're in early days of a new movement. And I think there's always that group that's kind of your first mover that sees that there's going to be long-term benefit for this. And so right now as an entity, we're facilitating that connection between those first mover producers and the first mover brands and making connections, and not, it's not a fully systematized, everything's baked, you're going to get this percentage increase in market value. Here's where I'm going to, personally speak from my heart around having to get all the merit badges to go and create market premiums. What I found in my own career is that when selling into the commodity system, you can get all the merit badges that get you those little premiums over time. But typically, unless you're in a producer cooperative that's really kind of baked that into their structure, that just those commodity markets over time, those premiums will wane. They'll dissipate as the program scales. You can see this in organic, you can see it in grass-fed, you can see it in natural, you can see it in non-GMO. It's happened across all of them. value streams for producers. So we're moving, I would say quickly, but with eyes wide open and with the utmost integrity into this ecosystem service credit market. We want to see producers being paid for the good work they're doing on the land and actually show this is offsetting cost to society. There's a market to brands for that, and there's a market to governments for that. Having real empirical data allows producers to get to that new asset class sooner. And then the other one is whole animal utility. And so I was very proud that with our partnership with Timberland, we were able to, maybe for the first time in modern history, get farmers paid for their hides, raw skins coming off of the abattoir. That money, that premium didn't go to the abattoir alone, it went to the producers as well. So we set up a mechanism where we were able to make payments back to the producer for something that most producers around the world pay a disposal fee for if they take in animals all the way to finish. Working on a project right now to do the same thing with pet. So when we can bring meat buyers and hide buyers and pet buyers together to create more utility for the animal. So it's not just premiums, it's getting paid for things that you weren't getting paid for before.
And I think, as you said, that Scope 3 accounting leads to long-term resilience, the reason why that you went down this path in the first place, Chris.
Totally, yeah. And so that's where again, that asset class resilience, we don't want to be giving away our impact away for free. We want to be creating the mechanisms that the brands can buy direct from farm, get traceability, and get that brand halo of story. But that ultimately, if they want that impact accounting, that's really a new thing that they should have to pay for it to get. And so creating the credits that still work within that notion of insets and offsets to be able to get them that accounting, those subtraction metrics, if you will, that they need, and have farmers get paid for those.
Oh, thank you so much for your time, Chris Kerston, US-based land to market program that is coming out of Savory Institute and actively working here in the New Zealand marketplace. We'll put some links to some of those institutions such as Arta Land Regenerative and, of course, Atkins Ranch in the description below on this podcast episode, so that if you do want to get in touch with them, as well as a link to the Savory Institute's Land to Market program as well.
Oh, nice boots.
Yeah, thanks. They're new.
Ben, you alright?
Oh, yeah, sorry, mate. Just meerkatting pretty hard, eh? Yeah. I just said to myself, Ben, work hard.
You deserve new boots.